In 1925, west of a little Colorado town called Longmont, everybody knew there would be a hot time in the old town. The Hovers had a beautiful home, a productive farm, and a successful business. When people entered their farmstead, they were ready to enjoy the Hovers' Sylvan supper. But it had been very different in 1902 when Charles and Katherine bought 160 acres here. The poor soil needed a lot of work. Farm life didn't offer all the opportunities Katherine had in Denver, and Beatriz was an orphan child who needed a loving family. The story of the Hovers is one of hope, determination, and commitment, and success. Charles, Katherine, and Beatriz made their own success at Hover Home with its view of Long's Peak. This is their story on the day of their Sylvan supper in 1925.
Hello, I'm Charles Hover. Welcome to our home. You know, if you're lucky in life, you find the place you're meant to be. For me, this is that place. This land, this house, this family. When I gaze across my fields at Long's Peak, I can see it changing all the time, glowing soft pink at sunrise, shining bright with snow at midday, and then fading to dark purple at sunset. When Major Stephen Long came through this area in 1820, he saw only a desolate prairie, land uninhabitable. Now some people call my land paradise. And this house, Hover Home, we waited over 10 years to build a house that suits our every need. And my family, my wife Katherine and our daughter Beatriz. They are my heart, pure and simple, my heart. When I was born in Wisconsin in 1867, the doctor told my parents I was such a sickly thing that I probably wouldn't live beyond the age of 3. Well, that was the first time, but not the last, that I exceeded the expectations of others. Age 21, I graduated from the University of Wisconsin with a degree in pharmacology, then joined my older brother William in Denver at the Hover Wholesale Drug Company, our family pharmaceutical business. Brother William enjoyed all the hustle and bustle of the big city, but I never did. And it was at the Hover Company I experienced a life-changing moment. I was doing inventory when the most beautiful woman I had ever seen walked up to my counter, bold as you please, and asked for an order for her sister's drugstore. Well, I tell you, I was so dumbstruck she had to ask me twice. When she smiled at me, I knew that my days as a confirmed bachelor were over, and I did not let her get away. We were married in 1898. Now, Katherine was a city girl through and through. She sang and played piano beautifully. She went to social teas and parties. But high society wasn't exactly my cup of tea. But I wouldn't have had the ability to break away if it hadn't been for a catastrophe at the Hover Company. January 1900, the top floor of our pine wood frame building crashed down into the other 3. Fortunately, no one was in the building at the time, but all our drug supplies lay in rubble in the street. It took us 2 years to rebuild, but that gave me the time to pursue my dream of a quieter country life as a farmer. Katherine said she would make a home wherever I wanted to be, so in 1902 we purchased this 160-acre farm north of Denver. My brother used to tease me, Charles, he'd say, you bought really poor land, but at least you bought lots of it. And that beautiful city girl was true to her word. We lived out here, first in the old farmhouse and then in a cottage we had built on the property. And did she complain? Well, maybe just a little. After one winter in the cottage, with only a fireplace for heat, Katherine declared she would not freeze to death on that farm. So for the next few years, we spent our winters in a boarding house in town. Some people call me a gentleman farmer. Well, you wouldn't have said that if you'd seen me in those early days, working side by side with my farm hands on a drainage system to control the highly alkaline soil on our farm. I studied farming just like I studied pharmaceuticals. I experimented with new strains of wheat and barley, and our soil became rich and productive. Soon my really poor farm was transformed into a thriving business, and I shared the profits with my tenant manager. And then there was the final part of our dream. Katherine and I were childless when we heard from a friend about a young orphan girl who needed a home. Well, we had a home that needed that little girl. We adopted Beatriz in 1907, and our family was complete. Katherine and I approached the design of our house as you would crop rotation, with care and plan. When we were finally ready to build, we had on hand a 56-page booklet of specifications, mostly Katherine's. We moved into our dream house in 1914, and it was Beatriz's idea to name it simply Hoover Home. I've worked on a lot of things here in Longmont and statewide, serving as president of the Colorado Wheat Growers Association, helping to bring the Boulder County Fair to Longmont. Right now, I'm a partner and manager of one of the largest canning factories in the world. A while back, the Republican Party asked me to run for governor of the state. It was a fine offer, and I was deeply honored, but I finally had to say no. You see, this is where I belong, here in Longmont, in Hoover Home, with my family. Yes, I am indeed a lucky man. I found the place I was meant to be.
I am Katherine Homer, and I am so glad that you were able to join us for our Sylvan supper. We have been out in the gardens cutting the roses and the flowers, getting ready for our event. Well, in 1900, when Charles told me that he was looking for a farm so we could move out of Denver, I had to take a deep breath and sit down. Leave Denver, leave my piano lessons, leave my seat in the chancel choir, and my widowed sister, and my social life. But Denver in 1900 had a population of about 133,000 people. While the construction and traffic noise was just so loud and jarring, while you took your life in your own hands just walking down the sidewalk. When the top story of the Hoover Drug Company collapsed and Charles and his brother William lost nearly everything, Charles and I took that as a sign. And we drove about 40 miles from Denver out on some land that Charles had found. Our first view of the Front Range took my breath away. Imagine living right beside the magnificent peaks on land that is ours for miles to see. Well, leaving Denver would not make me any less of a person than what I already am. And I have found here in Longmont, I have become much more than I ever imagined I could be. Well, I have entertained dignitaries from the governor of Colorado to the United States Secretary of State, and everyone from my farmer friends to my whisk club. Well, living in a small town is like that. You make your life what you want it to be. Well, when I received the illustrated set of Charles Dickens' works, all of my friends encouraged me to found the Dickens Club. And now we meet monthly and we read to each other. I decided if I liked fine cooking, I would cook it. And if I liked good music, I would create it. And I would find a church where I could sing and teach and glory in the joy of the Lord. And when I bake cherry pies, it is always with the sweetest and the freshest cherries because they are grown right here on our land. And when we have asparagus for supper, it is always the wild asparagus that we pick along the ditches. We grow our raspberries, our gooseberries, and our currant bushes, and we harvest our apples every summer to make cider with our cider press. Well, I might not be a farmer like Charles, but I have discovered that I am an avid gardener. And there is no place nicer than right here in my garden, growing my roses, my peonies, and the tulips that brighten our lives. Well, here in Longmont, I became a mother. Charles and I had been married about 8 years when we heard about a little 9-year-old orphan girl with no place to live. Well, we invited her into our home, and we fell in love with her. We discovered that she was the missing piece in our family. And we adopted Beatriz, and she has been our daughter since 1907. Well, Charles, Beatriz, and I attend St. Stephen's Episcopal Church on the corner of 5th and Main Street. We work together to create our Sylvan supper and to raise donations for the church. And people come from miles around to join us. We try to make it a magical event, allowing everyone to feel the joy we have living here in Longmont. Well, we love the excitement of the Sylvan suppers. But at the end of the evening, when Charles, Beatriz, and I are sitting in the parlor, just our little family, reading silently together, and I look out the window at the mountain range, and I realize that there is no place in the world that I would rather be.
Hello, my name is Beatriz Hoover, and welcome to Historic Hoover Home. I'm not sure where I was born, but I know where I was raised, right here on the farm, and I wouldn't want it any other way. I don't remember where I lived before I came to the farm. It was friends of the Hoovers that told them about me, and I was invited down to Longmont for a visit and never left. I was 9 years old when I was adopted by the Hoovers, and on that special day, Mr. and Mrs. Hoover became father and mother, and I wouldn't want it any other way. I'm not one who personally believes you should go searching for your biological parents if you've been adopted. I don't think I was abandoned, but I never care to know. Besides, mother and father always told me that I had nothing to be ashamed about. I was just grateful to be adopted by 2 loving parents and given a beautiful home life. I was an only child growing up on these here 160 acres, but I wasn't very lonely. I had a collie Teddy and a sheepdog Peter Pan. I also had a horse Flossie who was endearing but very stubborn. She would pull our buggy on errands if and when the mood struck her. Growing up, I learned how to entertain myself. I loved riding my bicycle and I was an avid reader. I enjoyed historical novels, biographies, letters, and the occasional detective story. My parents also shared my love of reading, and we would spend countless hours reading to each other. Books were also common presence in our family. In fact, I always said, Christmas without a book would be a disaster. I agree with what Jane Austen wrote in Pride and Prejudice. I declare, after all, there is no enjoyment like reading. How much sooner one tires of anything than a book. When I have a house of my own, I shall be miserable if I do not have an excellent library. From the time I started school, I had a group of close best friends, and we called ourselves the CS Girls, or Central Stickers. They often assist us during our Sylvan supper events, so you'll probably meet them. As a student, I walked the muddy roads to Longmont High School, where I graduated in 1917 in a class of 50. After high school, Mother wanted me to attend Vassar College, but I finally decided on Bradford, where I studied literature. But I soon begged to come home after Mother fell ill. But my proudest accomplishment is transcribing Braille. When Aunt Minnie, my mother's sister, came to visit, we'd always spend countless hours reading to each other. In fact, if the chores needed to be done and a book had yet to be completed, Mother and Aunt Minnie would do the dishes while I continued reading aloud to them. However, my Aunt Minnie's eyesight was poor, and I became inspired. I wanted to make sure that everyone could enjoy the pleasure of a book, even if they visually couldn't read the words on the page. So I trained via correspondence course. Miss McGee was my supervisor, and she was really strict. I started out by using a slate and stylus, and later a Braille writer, which looks a lot like a typewriter but has only 6 keys. I'm proud of learning Braille because it made my Aunt Minnie so happy. She always said her fondest times were reading with us. The books we read at Hoover Home open the world to us and put our thoughts into words. It was heartbreaking that 11 of our boys from Longmont died overseas during the war. My father's a very patriotic man and tried to persuade them to help the war effort by staying on the farm and raising crops, but they couldn't be stopped. Mother, Father, and I often think of their names as we read this poem. In Flanders fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks still bravely singing fly. We are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow. Loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from failing hands we throw. The torch be yours, to hold it high, if you break faith with us who die. We shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
I'm Minnie Av Wilson. When my younger sister Katherine and I were little, Father moved us all from Illinois to Denver to open a jewelry store. I loved Denver from the minute we arrived. It was already the 26th largest city in America, full of millionaires and mansions, railroads, and department stores. And it had the grandest opera house you'll ever see. We had so much opportunity in Denver. We became part of the exciting, fast-paced Denver society. Katherine even took piano lessons under the organist at the St. John's Episcopal Cathedral. In 1887, I married John R. Wilson. He was a brilliant pharmacist, and he owned the Wilson Drug Company. Our son Jack was born the next year. 1 year later, though, my husband John went hunting, got a respiratory illness, and died. That was a heartbreaking blow. But the AV girls were raised to be strong and capable. I operated the Wilson Drug Company all by myself for all this time until just a couple of years ago in 1922. That's where the Hoover story comes in. You know, my sister Katherine turned heads wherever she went. She was working for me when she went to the Hoover Drug Company to pick up supplies. She stepped into the back and asked Charles Hoover for her order. Everybody knew he was a 30-year-old confirmed bachelor. I guess Katherine was stronger than he was confirmed because they were married in 1898. Nobody was more surprised than me when Katherine said they were going to move to Longmont. You might as well have said they were going to move to Alaska. It was so far away. I just hated to see her go. Even nowadays, in 1925, some people think Longmont is a dusty little town with hogs at one end and sugar beets on the other. But I learned differently. When Charles and Katherine bought their land in 1902, Longmont had about 2,000 people, 3 weekly newspapers, 1 daily newspaper, an opera house, and no saloons. Back in Denver, every day I lost a little more of my eyesight. The doctors say it's cataracts, and it's robbed me of everything but my peripheral vision. When Jack was old enough to help, he put aside his childhood dream of being a doctor so he could work with me at the drugstore. In the summers, Jack and I come to Longmont and stay on the farmstead. The 2 cousins are best friends, and we love visiting here. Bea even said I inspired her to learn Braille. Look at this lovely version of the Bible in Braille. There are 2 things that I love most about being here. It's glorious to be surrounded by all the flowers when Katherine and Bea are gardening. Charles always says they should hire someone, but they won't have it. And I love the evenings when we're all sitting together and read. I always think of the beautiful garden here at Hoover Home when I hear this poem. The Lord God planted a garden in the first white days of the world, and he set there an angel warden in a garment of light enfurled, so near to the peace of heaven that the hawk might nest with the wren. From there in the cool of the even, God walked with the first of men. The kiss of the sun for pardon, the song of the birds for mirth. One is nearer God's heart in a garden than anywhere else on earth.
I work this land for Mr. Hoover. I'm Carl Ziegler. For 3 generations, my family has been tenant farmers. My father was a tenant farmer, his father was a tenant farmer, his father's father. 3 generations of Zieglers working the land with no hope to ever own it. This generation is going to be different because of Mr. Hoover and me. My family is from Bavaria. We came here to escape poverty and religious persecution. The chance for tenant farmers to own their own land was a dream to us. That's not the way Mr. Hoover came to farming. He told me he had never lived on a farm until he bought this land in 1902. But rotation and maintaining fertility were household topics in his hometown. Mr. Hoover loves to read agricultural material, and he's set about improving the farm based on what he calls the scientific method. Mr. Hoover experiments with ways to make soil better and crops stronger. You see, he's interested in anything that makes a farmer's life better. This is where I can change my family's future. Mr. Hoover said I could take a salary or divide the profits with him. Year in, year out, being a partner is a better deal for me. If we have a bad year, my losses are limited to the labor I contributed. That's the only successful plan for both the owner and the tenant. There's an article that ran in the Denver newspaper after Mr. Hoover had been working this land for 10 years. It says, "Prairie Farm is paradise in 10 years. Former druggist of Denver buys alkali waste and in a few years transforms it into modern farm of great value." I see our arrangement like that. For 3 generations, tenant farmers have been wasting our dreams working on farms that will never be ours. Mr. Hoover and I are changing all that. We're working together so that I'll be the first tenant farmer in my family to ever earn enough money to buy my own farm.
I'm Ava Ziggler, and I'm the tenant farmer's wife. I'm sure you've heard the saying, a man may work from sun to sun, but a woman's work is never done. Well, here on the farm, nobody's work is ever done. There's always something. If it's not milking, it's planting. If it's not harvesting, it's fertilizing. Everyone works in a farm family, starting with my husband Carl, all the way to our little children. Our families have been tenant farmers for years and years, and the work never gets any easier. I grew up working hard with long days and little money. We grew into the chores, milking the cows, harnessing the horses, gathering eggs, cleaning the outhouse, washing clothes, and more. On top of that, we walked to school every day, rain or shine, and helped out in the fields during the summers. Spring, summer, fall, and winter, we did the chores that the season called for. Farming is the type work where you put the seeds in the ground and put a heaping dose of hope on top of them. For every crop, we're battling the weather, the bugs, the weeds. It's not just the work that's hard, it's keeping up with all the changes. But here on the Hoover farmstead, we're luckier than most tenant farmers. And yes, I'd be glad to tell you what makes us so lucky. First, Mr. Hoover has given us a 5-year contract. That means we don't have to move when the harvest is over. And this farmhouse almost starts to feel like home, at least 5 years of home. Second, Mr. Hoover is a progressive farmer. Every day, my Carl learns something new about rotating the crop or planting the grain. We're tenant farmers, but we have a share of the profit. So the success of Mr. Hoover's experiments means we have success too. And who doesn't like that? Third, we have electricity and running water. Lots of tenant farmers we know don't have that, even now in 1925. Those are the basic things, but I'd like to tell you what makes this the best place we've ever lived. I'm up at 5 a.m. to milk the cows. The children help me skim the cream off the top of the milk and bring the milk in pans to the Hoovers. Mrs. Hoover always makes sure I've saved some milk for the children and sometimes pours us glasses of old-fashioned buttermilk. She and Miss Beatriz grow raspberries, gooseberries, and currants, and they never mind sharing. They have 12 apple trees, and Miss Beatriz always says she's pressed too much cider and asks the children to help her drink it. When the wild asparagus grows along the ditches, she and Mrs. Hoover ask the children to help them pick it. And the flowers. They fill the farmhouse with the most wonderful scent all spring and summer long. Every year, the Hoovers give a party called the Sylvan Supper. There's all their friends from town and church and all the committees they're on. And our farmhouse sits right in the middle of it. Miss Beatriz makes a point to come make sure we know we're invited. Well, it would be pretty embarrassing for us to be right there in the middle, pretending like we're not there. Still, there might be some folks who wouldn't think of including us. I get out our Sunday clothes and give the children a spit and a polish. Then we walk around this farmstead just like we're part of the family. See what I mean about being so lucky to live here? Tomorrow, when the party's all over and the Hoovers are worn out from making sure everybody's had a good time, I'm going to bake them an apple pie. My Carl says my pies are the best in all Colorado. I just want to thank the Hoovers for helping us to feel like part of the family and not just tenants who will be moving on when our contract's over. Maybe by that time, we'll be able to buy a little land of our own and we'll be farmers, free and clear, not just tenants.
You've probably heard that there's a hot time happening in places like New Orleans, New York, and Los Angeles. But I'm here to tell you the Roaring Twenties haven't left Colorado behind. Here in 1925, we've got pep, pulchritude, punch, and presentation too. I know you've heard of it, but if you haven't, I'm not sure what to tell you. It's like Louis Armstrong says, if you have to ask what jazz is, you'll never know. Everybody knows the music, because almost everybody has a radio, even out here in the farms of Longmont. In fact, here at the Hoover home, we're all doing the Charleston, and the Black Bottom too. Here's a song that everyone's dancing to, and it's one of my favorites too. It's called Ain't We Got Fun. Every morning, every evening, ain't we got fun? Not much money, oh, but honey, ain't we got fun? The rent's unpaid, dear, we haven't a car, and anyway, dear, we'll stay as we are. Even if we owe the grocer, still we got fun. Tax collectors getting closer, still we got fun. There's nothing surer, the rich get rich and the poor get poorer. In the meantime, in between time, ain't we got fun? Even if we owe the grocer, still we got fun. Tax collectors getting closer, ain't we got fun? There's nothing surer, the rich get rich and the poor get poorer. In the meantime, in between time, ain't we got fun? Well, there's going to be some dancing tonight at the Hoover home, and I'm going to be right in the middle of it. Maybe you don't know the steps, but I'll bet you anything you've heard this hot little number. Charleston, Charleston, made in Carolina. Some dance, some prance, some say better than Vina. Charleston, Charleston, boy, how you can shuffle. Every step you leads to something. Man, I'm telling you, it's the Lapazoo buck dance, wing dance. Will be a back number of Charleston, Charleston. That dance is sure to come. Sometimes you dance it one time. The dance called a Charleston made Tucker lie. Sometime you dance it one time. The dance called a Charleston made South Carolina. Could make me feel blue, or even be glad, just to be sad, thinking of you. Some people I've seen might never be mean, might never be cross, or try to be boss, but they wouldn't do. But nobody else gave me a thrill. With all your faults, I love you still. It had to be you, wonderful you. It had to be you. It had to be you. It had to be you. I wandered around, finally found somebody who could make me feel true, could make me feel blue, or even be glad, just to be sad, thinking of you. Some people I've seen might never be mean, might never be cross, or try to be boss, but they wouldn't do. But nobody else gave me a thrill. With all your faults, I love you still. It had to be you, wonderful you. It had had to be you. Some people I've seen might never be me, might never be cross, but try to be boss, but they wouldn't do. But nobody else gave me a thrill. With all your faults, I love you still. It had to be